Good afternoon. Welcome to the Labor Forum here on WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. My name is Diane Mathowitz and I'm a retired auto worker and I've been the host of this program for several years now. I want to give a big hello to Gary Washington, who started the program back in 1986. And actually Gary's going to be here. We're going to actually do an interview with Gary that's going to be videotaped for posterity later this evening. So we'll hope to see Gary before we leave the program, actually. The opinions that are expressed on the Labor Forum may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers here at WRFG. I do want to let everyone know that there are so many ways that you can stay in touch with the Labor Forum. You know, we have our own website, wrfglaborforum.org, where you can keep up with not just our programs, but that's where we also put other information about what's going on in the labor movement and the progressive movement here in the city and around the world. We also have a Facebook page, and we'd very much like for you to like it. And we have a Twitter, and we also, of course, are live streaming right at this very moment. Oh, no, we're not. Today we're not live streaming. Sorry. But we do, we're videotaping it, and so if you want to watch the program at your leisure, you can go to the Labor Forum YouTube channel. And all the programs are archived there, both in their audio and visual formats. So I want to say happy birthday to Paul McLennan, who is not here today. He is enjoying some time off and celebrating his birthday. I do want to say hello to Christopher Hollis, who is the engineer, and he's going to be doing the labor history that Paul usually does. And to Ozzy Ibrahimi, who does our videoing and our social media work. So we were going to start right away with our labor headlines for Monday, February 15th, 2016. Half of February is already over. I don't know, the time just seems to speed by every year now. Anyway, on February 4th, we really should have reported this story last week, but failed to, and so it's an important story. On February 4th, trade ministers from 12 countries met in Auckland, New Zealand, to sign the final wording of the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement known as TPP. If you remember, Atlanta was the site of the concluding secret negotiating session in October of 2015. Unions, community, environmental, and faith-based groups organized multiple forms of protest, direct actions, which included some folks getting arrested, as well as press conferences and educational events to alert the public to the dangerous consequences of the TPP. Delegations from other countries, including farmers from Japan and labor leaders from Canada, along with women suffering from cancer and other deadly illnesses concerned about access to necessary drugs under TPP, all played a key role in lengthening the negotiating sessions almost to the breaking point. It was literally at the last moment that the corporate-backed agreement garnered passage, setting the stage for the February 4th ceremony in New Zealand, with officials from Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, the US, and Vietnam. The streets of Auckland were filled with tens of thousands of militant protesters denouncing the provisions of the TPP that endanger worker rights, food safety, and the environment, diminish human rights and democratic practices, and strengthen the domination of corporate profiteering. There were also Flush the TPP protests in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and other U.S. cities on that day. The 12 countries now have 2 years to ratify the agreement. In the U.S., as a result of the passage of so-called fast-track legislation, Congress has no ability to alter the treaty provisions and can only vote yes or no when the treaty comes up for consideration. Although the Obama administration has made passage of the TPP a priority, it is likely that presidential election maneuvering will prevent it coming before Congress until after November 2016. There is still opportunity for workers and their allies to conduct a powerful struggle to stop the TPP. There are petitions and other informative articles about the treacherous provisions of the TPP on various union websites and progressive blogs and news outlets. For our national news, the workers of West Virginia waged a fierce fight, but on February 12th, the state's legislators voted to override a veto by Governor Earl Ray Tomblin of a right-to-work bill. This anti-worker, anti-union legislation will go into effect in May of this year, making West Virginia the 26th state to restrict workers' ability to organize. The bill, with the deceptive name of, quote, Establishing West Virginia Workplace Freedom Act, close quote, was fast-tracked through the legislature's 2-month session. The right-wing majority held hearings, conducted floor debate, and held final votes in just 3 weeks, despite the presence of thousands of opponents rallying inside and outside the Capitol building and intense lobbying by unions and community groups. The Koch brothers funded a campaign by Americans for Prosperity that flooded the airwaves with ads and mailed out flyers promising jobs if only the state had a so-called right-to-work law. The passage of this anti-worker legislation has been a top priority of a whole host of corporate front groups who can expend millions and millions of dollars in campaign contributions to elected officials and in the name of phony public interest groups. Despite the obstacles these right-to-work-for-less laws present to workers, the fight for $15 an hour and a union movement and other struggles against police terror, foreclosures, mass incarceration, and for immigrant rights, to name just a few, make it clear that the deciding power lies with an organized people. And lastly, there is an important protest taking place tonight from 5:30 to 9 p.m. in Smyrna at the City Council meeting at 2800 King Street. That's 2800 King Street in Smyrna. Kevin Owens, the police officer who killed 23-year-old Nicholas Thomas on March 24th of 2015, is being promoted to the status of a lieutenant. The circumstances of Thomas's death have raised many questions, and the family and community continue to demand answers and justice for Nick Thomas. People will be addressing the City Council members and urging them to deny any promotion to Owens. Moreover, they are seeking charges be brought against him. For those who are unable to be seated inside, there will be a rally on the City Hall steps explaining the issues of this police killing and its connection to the national struggle against police violence, particularly against people of color. That concludes our labor headlines for today. And Christopher is going to read and present our This Week in Labor History.
Thank you, Diane.
Hi, Christopher.
Hi, how are you?
Is this exciting for you?
It's a little exciting. Yeah. I'm just happy to relieve the duties of Paul McLennan because it's his birthday. So I'm going to read today's labor history. Today is President's Day, which is a holiday in the United States held on the third Monday in February. It was originally established in 1885 in recognition of President George Washington. While several states still have individual holidays honoring the birthdays of Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and other figures, President's Day is now viewed as a day to recognize all U.S. presidents, past and present. The story of President's Day begins in 1800. Following President George Washington's death in 1799, his February 22nd birthday became an annual day of remembrance. At the time, Washington was honored as the most important figure in American history, and events like the 1832 centennial of his birth and the start of the construction of the Washington Monument in 1848 were cause for national celebration. An article on the Zen Education Project website by Clarence Lusane gives us a more accurate account of the white men who have held the office of president. The Zen Education Project promotes and supports the teaching of people's history in classrooms across the country. People's history emphasizes the role of working people, women, people of color, and organized social movements in shaping history. Students learn that history is made not by a few heroic individuals, but instead by people who organize collectively to make a difference. In the article, Clarence Lusane says what is missing from President's Day is the true history that more than 1 in 4 U.S. presidents were involved in human trafficking and slavery. The presidents bought, sold, and bred enslaved people for profit. Of the 12 presidents who were enslavers, more than half kept people in bondage at the White House. For this reason, there is little doubt that the first person of African descent to enter the White House, or the presidential homes used in New York and Philadelphia before construction of the White House was complete, was an enslaved person. The White House itself, the home of presidents and symbol of the U.S. presidency, was built with slave labor, just like most other major building projects had been in the 18th century United States. President Washington initially wanted to hire foreign labor to build the White House, but when he realized how costly it would be to pay people fairly, he restored slave labor. There is a largely hidden and silenced black history of the U.S. presidency. While professing to be against slavery, as President Washington took no real steps in that direction and in fact did everything he could to ensure that not one of the more than 300 people he owned could secure their freedom. During the 10 years of construction of the White House, George Washington spent time in Philadelphia where a law called the Gradual Abolition Act passed in 1780. It stated that any slaves brought into the state were eligible to apply for their freedom if they were there for longer than 6 months. To get around the law, Washington rotated the people working for him in bondage so that they were there for less than 6 months each. As the movement against slavery grew, it included members of the president's very own household who he enslaved. One of the presidential slaves was Oni Maria Judge in March of 1796. Oni was told that she would be given to Martha Washington's granddaughter as a wedding present. Oni carefully planned her escape and slipped out of the Washingtons' home in Philadelphia while the Washingtons were eating dinner. Oni Judge fled the most powerful man in the United States, defied his attempts to trick her back into slavery, and lived out a better life. Her escape was an inspiration to the abolition movement and other African Americans who were enslaved. By the age 10, Paul Jennings was enslaved at the White House as a footman for James Madison, the 4th President of the United States. When he got older, Dolly Madison hired out Jennings, keeping every last red cent of his earnings. Dolly indicated in her will that she would give Jennings his freedom, but instead sold him before she died. His freedom was eventually purchased. Erasing enslaved African Americans from the White House and the presidency presents a false portrait of our country's history. If we are to understand a fuller people's history of the United States, we need to recognize that every aspect of early America was built on white supremacy, patriarchy, and slavery.
Thank you so much for reading that. Good job.
Thank you.
And then again, we always have to thank Paul because he always brings such another view, an important view, and the kind of view that you could get here on the Labor Forum on WRFG. So I'm so happy that our guest is seated right next to me. I know that many of you perhaps know Jean Davis. Jean's been a long-time activist. She was a teacher. She's been a labor supporter, fighter for, I don't know, a long time. I'm not going to ask Jean how old she is because the two of us have known each other for probably 30 plus years, so you can know that we're at least 31. Anyway, Jean is here because there's another issue that's really facing many retired workers, many who often only are getting by on Social Security or very small pensions. And that's the taking care of grandchildren and even great-grandchildren when they are already in their 60s, 70s, 80s. And this is a growing problem in not just Atlanta, but in the United States. And Jean's coming here on the Labor Forum to really provide, I think, a good description of this issue that maybe some of us haven't even thought about. So welcome, Jean Davis, to the Labor Forum.
Well, thank you so much, Diane. I feel so at home. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I started out as a classroom teacher, member of the American Federation of Teachers. Then I got a little promotion and went to work for the National Afla Brandoff Institute. We all know that's a labor organization. Then I went to work for the National AFL-CIO as a co-director. And since this is a history moment, I was the first and only black woman to be political director for the National AFL-CIO. So kudos for me today. It just came to my mind. But I want you to know that being in the labor movement has empowered me to do the work that we do in the community by helping other people. If you'll notice, I have on a button that says I make a difference every day. And that button is something that exemplifies what we do with grandparents. Did you know that in the state of Georgia, it ranks number 6 of grandparents and kin raising children that are not their own? Across Georgia, grandparents, relatives, and family and friends have provided shelter and care for children whose parents can no longer care for them for one reason or the other. And we have been advocating to get some relief for that, for these grandparents and relatives. So there are about a few of us who have been in the trenches since 2003. Here it is 2015, advocating on a level, state level, local level, and county levels, asking that grandparents who are raising grandchildren be heard. Just recently, Miss Gloria Smith, Miss Betty Butler, and I traveled across the state of Georgia. We went to 5 different places, listened to grandparent stories telling about the joy of raising children and the issues that we face, the problems are. The problems that we face are grandparents don't have the same or similar benefits that foster parents get when they have foster children. We've been advocating for years. Miss Gloria Smith, I'd like to say, could not make it today, but she has been out there working very hard to make this happen, just like I have. We ran into some wonderful things this year that we think are going to make a difference for grandparents raising grandchildren. During the town hall meetings as we went across, started in Dalton, Georgia, I had no idea that we had so many grandparents in that area raising grandchildren, but we used a system called the Nexus Neighborhood Map to collect data on where all of these grandparents are, since we're the 6th largest state with grandparents raising grandchildren. And we were amazed to find out how so many grandparents are. But kinship too. When we talk about the kinship, it's like we find aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and close family members raising children. So what has happened with us, with our pension, we've had to say, okay, we can't take those trips, we can't go on trips, we can't get on boats and go do little fun things. We've got to raise these children because that's the right thing to do. And we love our children. We love them being in our family, and we don't want our family torn apart. So what we decided was, in order to make change, you have to have your voice heard. And that's what a lot of our elected officials have said to us. If you want to make change, you have to tell your story so that people will know what that's about. I received my granddaughter when she was a baby. My daughter was a crack addict. I have to share that with people so you'll know that some of the things that happen to us in this life is not sometimes always fair, but it's real. My daughter is deceased, and I raised my granddaughter from the time she was a little baby until now. She's had a 2nd year in college, and I'm real excited about that. How I was able to do that, I took early retirement from work so that I would be there for her. And when I looked at the amount of money that I was going to be making, it was like, Lord, how are we going to make it on this? So it came to me that I could adopt her. And with the adoption, when I was old enough to get my Social Security, she would be able to get Social Security too. And that is a major factor. We find grandparents who are at the poverty level having to deny themselves of so many things, and the children, because our finances are limited. Now what we see is happening, we think that we have a breakthrough, and I love that word, a breakthrough, that we might just be able to tell our story to elected officials on February the 25th, and they might hear us and say, yeah, we want to make your children whole. We are asking elected officials to give our children the similar or same benefits that children who are raised in foster homes, foster home, and we're asking only for about 80% of what they get. And we know that everybody will not receive that, but we've got to make our children whole. One story that I heard in Dalton was so profound. This grandparent said that her children were always wondering why foster children were able to do so much more, the clothing, the food, and even go to college. And they wanted to be foster children instead of just in grandparent-headed households. So this issue is really very important, that you know what it's about and that you stand up and support us and say, yeah, these people really have stood up. We stepped up to the plate and says, yes, these are our babies. We're going to take care of them no matter what. And I was just laughing with my granddaughter. I haven't felt that I could take a trip in over 20 years. And that's long overdue. The youngest grandparent that we had last year was 38 years old. So what we're finding now is grandparents are getting younger. And think about the baby boomers that's coming up. It's going to be a large population of baby boomers, and it's going to be more of them than it is of us today having to raise children that are not their own.
I wanted to ask you a question, because I read some of the issues that grandparents and other kin sometimes face. And one of the things I saw was that lots of times when this happens, it's a kind of a disaster that happened. I mean, in other words, there's no real possibility to do any planning. It literally happens overnight or very quickly. And so that grandparents don't even have the documentation that allows them to enter children into school, to get vaccinations, in other words, there's all kinds of paperwork that's required that the grandparent may not have. And I would have never have ever even thought of that. Could you describe that problem a little more?
Yes, that is very true. I just had a grandparent call in September. She was trying to enroll her children in school, and they would not allow her to enroll the child because she didn't have some specific papers. We did pass a bill that said we could use a power of attorney. You know, everybody has a POA when they need it, but the school systems have not been educated to know that this is a law and that grandparents don't need to go through all of these changes. They have the paper in their hands, and they give them 30 days to get it right. We're asking that they give us more days, and that they also tell us how we can get waivers to help us get these documents that we need. It's really a lot of stress on people. When you think about grandparents who are disabled and trying to go in and out of courts trying to get things done, that poses a problem. And we're asking that law also is looked at so that we won't have to go through that stress. Thanks for asking that question.
So when you say that Georgia has the 6th highest number of grandparents or other kinfolk taking care of children, what does that translate into numbers, if you know?
Well,
how many thousands of families, and is it concentrated more in cities or more in rural areas, more in one part of the state than another, or is it sort of spread out, if you know?
It's spread out, and we do have some data that says that with Georgia being the 6th largest state that has grandparents, in the last census, we found that there were 136,000 plus children being raised in grandparent-headed households.
Okay, I'm going to repeat that. 136,000 children. So this is not a small issue for retirees and people who have worked their whole lives. And I have to say, many times, again, if it's grandmothers whose wages were never sufficient to begin with, and so their pensions and their Social Security is the least. And so I would say that this is probably a big factor in the high poverty rates that we find, not just here in Georgia, but in so many areas of the South in particular, where wages, because of the anti-worker, anti-union legislation that we talked about earlier, prevails.
That's right. You're absolutely right about that. in 2000, there were over 92,000 grandparents raising grandchildren. Now this is what, 2015, it has doubled. And I'd like to just share a few little things about what the problem is when we look at people who are in the poverty level. Going to DFACS and talking to DFACS has been like muddling through, I'd say mud. You got boots on and you're trying to get through mud, and it's like you're weighted down, you can't get there. And it's frustrating to the grandparent, it's frustrating to the children with all of this paperwork that we have. And then when you get there, they tell you that we can't help you because they take our salary into consideration. That does not happen for foster children. They don't take the family's salary into consideration, but for us, they do that. And it's a mental problem too, you know. It keeps us stressed out. We can't get done what we need to. And education, oh my God. A lot of our children have issues. The highest thing that we've seen with diagnosis is being diagnosed with a symptom, and I need people to understand, symptom of ADHD. You cannot have ADHD, you have a symptom. There are so many different symptoms. And the school system is not equipped to deal with children who have those diagnoses. So it seems like everything is happening with us. We're financially, then we have education, then we have social things that we can't do. Our children can't participate in a lot of different things because we don't have the money, and we don't have other resources that they're needing.
Jean, I want to thank you because you have just brought, I think, to this program and to our listeners an issue that very clearly impacts many people in our community. And I'm sure every listener knows somebody who is in this situation or is in their neighborhood and facing it. I want to thank you for coming by the Labor Forum today. I wanted to give you one more chance to let people know the details of this Grandparents' Day that you talked about that's going to be on the 25th.
And I want to say a grand thank you to you, Diane. I get emotional. This is a passion. I've been doing this since 2003, really 1994. I was in an Al-Anon program, and it said, okay, we need a support group. What you can do is come to the Capitol on February 25th from 9 to 2 to tell your story so that people can hear the things that you are experiencing. We'll be there. We'll be looking for you to just come share with your elected officials if you can, or anyone that will listen to us that can make changes in the law. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jean.
Thank you.
And our caller is on the line, but we have to take a little short break. So thank you so much, Darnell, for being prompt and calling in. And we will be right back after these messages with Daryl Lane of the Bakers Union. Who's going to talk to us about this Nabisco situation in Chicago.